And welcome back to Fresh Outlook. I'm TWB. Well, the oil explosion of Deepwater Horizon, the rig, it devastated the Gulf back in April of 2010. Almost 3 years later, BP is finally on trial. Here's the latest. Let's take a look.
British oil giant BP is at the center of a U.S. trial to pay for its major oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. 11 workers died when the rig exploded on April 20th, 2010.
Well, trials are about justice, and this is justice that's been a long time coming. So I think people are very excited that this is beginning today, hopeful that they'll get a result which will both make sure that the resources are available to restore the coast. Ultimately, that's what we want to see, but also send a very powerful signal to every operator in the Gulf, every company that's doing business out there, that this is too important to cut corners, to try to save a buck, to destroy the coast in the meantime.
Unless a settlement is reached, the judge will decide how much more money BP owes for the environmental catastrophe.
This is a living disaster. We're concerned about current effects. We're concerned about effects decades into the future from this disaster. The trial is really important because we want BP to pay. We want them to be accountable for being grossly negligent, putting their bottom line ahead of human life, bird life, our seafood, our economy is unacceptable.
BP estimates it will pay a total of $42 billion to fully resolve its liability for the disaster.
There have been so many nuances to this case and so many different things going on, and the settlements on the private claims and so forth. I think that a lot of people forget that the biggest issues are still outstanding, which is the environmental damage that was done.
In 2010, by the time BP finally capped the well, it had spewed an estimated 172 million gallons of crude into the Gulf. It fouled marshes and beaches, killing wildlife and closing vast areas to fishing.
It is just painful to watch those images. You just never get used to it. Obviously, the scope of this trial is just massive, really unprecedented. I want to bring in a new guest to our panel. We should have Professor Blaine LeCesne, who is a law professor at Loyola University of New Orleans. Blaine, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great to have you. Thanks for joining us. Just, since you do have a legal background, can you just break it down in very simple terms? What charges has the government brought against BP in this civil trial, and how much money do we think BP will, or more money will BP have to pay, in your opinion?
Well, the primary liability that BP faces from the United States is involves civil penalties under the Clean Water Act. And those penalties are based upon the amount of oil that has been spilled and whether or not the spill was caused by ordinary negligence or gross negligence. If it is ordinary negligence, it is assessed at up to $1,100 a barrel. If it is the result of gross negligence, it's up to $4,300 a barrel based upon the amount of oil that has been spilled that we know of, and that's part of what's going to be determined in this trial. BP is facing upwards of $17 billion in civil penalties under the Clean Water Act should it be found liable for gross negligence. So gross negligence is a very important central determination in this trial that will ultimately determine the scope of BP's legal exposure. The other component that the U.S. government is seeking against BP is something called National Resource Damages Assessments under the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. And essentially those are remedial damages that are intended to go to the Gulf states whose environment was impacted by the oil spill, and those damages are intended to restore the environment to the condition it was in prior to the spill. So those are the two main components, and the National Resource Damage Assessments, it's anyone's guess as to what that total figure might be, but that could be another 5 to 10 billion on top of the potential 17 billion under the Clean Water Act. Now keep in mind, that's the judgment value of the case. The U.S. government and the plaintiffs will essentially have to hit a home run to get that.
Right.
And gross negligence is, of course, a fairly high hurdle for the
well, right. Blaine, to use your words, will they hit a home run? Panel, what do you think? Do you think they're going to be charged? Will the DOJ charge BP with gross negligence and you know, sort of the most extreme charge and penalty. Dee Dee, what do you think?
Well, I don't think they should, but I do think this is.
You don't think they should?
No, I don't, because it doesn't look like it's gross negligence.
Stop the car.
This is 1,000 times in testing. It worked before. It was a blowout. Obviously, it was a mistake. However, that's not gross negligence. And as the attorney said, it is a very high bar. And BP has spent billions of dollars trying to make up for this. So no, but I do think the administration is definitely being a little harder on them and punitive to this company because it's an oil company.
Well, I mean, they're just saying that, you know, BP was putting profit above safety, but everybody's pointing fingers at Halliburton and sort of, you know, the makers of the rig, that BP isn't the only one to blame.
Gross negligence, meaning that they were just, you know, weren't doing their job, and obviously it was willful. I mean, you know, I'm sure that they don't willfully do this. So that's when it's gross negligence, and that is a very high bar, and I really don't think it'll happen.
You don't think it'll happen? Basil, do you think it'll happen?
Well, it's not about, I disagree slightly, because I think it's not just about did they willfully do something that, even though they
it's
said
willful misconduct and gross negligence.
Yeah, but it could be a situation where they specifically wanted to cut costs and they said, well, look, we'll just take the risk no matter what happens. But I do agree with you that it's a very high bar. It's going to be difficult because of exactly what you said. If everyone is blaming the other person, where do you actually draw the lines of accountability?
Right.
And that is going to be a very, very difficult task for them.
Yeah, Blaine, I want to go back to you. Do you think they will be charged with gross negligence? And what's been BP's defense so far of these charges?
Well, I think inevitably BP is going to be found to be grossly negligent. Dee Dee is right in a sense that it's a high bar, and it has been analogized to willful misconduct, but that's not the only way you can find gross negligence. You seemingly have here some evidence of financially motivated misconduct, and you have two separate investigative findings by federal investigative agencies that have pinpointed specific decisions that had a monetary value to them in terms of the bottom line that would be saved by taking those shortcuts, and those shortcuts inevitably increase the risk of harm in an already inherently dangerous environment of deep water drilling. So you have financially motivated misconduct. You have conduct that is consistent with a pattern of disregarding safety in the past. We all know about BP's difficulties. And you have what I call aggregate gross negligence, that even if those individual missteps are construed as ordinary negligence, in the aggregate, they can be found to be gross negligence because it's in a high-risk setting. So what the court is going to be looking for is some level of moral culpability to their conduct. It doesn't have to be intentional, but it could be such a level of callous indifference or a conscious disregard of a serious possibility of harm that would rise to the level of gross negligence. And I think that's where BP has the problem. And if this isn't gross negligence, I don't know what is. We may as well throw that term out of the
Yeah, I'm with you. If this isn't it, what is? Professor LeCesne, I want to thank you for your insight. Truly invaluable and quite fresh. All right, thanks for joining us. So panel, I do want to throw this question out to you. Why did previous attempts at a settlement fail? Why are we at this point? Why are we going to trial? Anyone have any ideas? Because I don't. Dee Dee?
well, you know, they've got a $20 billion fund for folks that are trying to get money out of this because, you know, it's a difficult financial time. And if you've got money sitting there, people are going to try to get it whether they deserve it or not. It just is. So as far as like going to trial, I mean, I think the government, I think it's partially grandstanding because it's anti-oil agenda. You know, and BP, I mean, they've been over backwards to try to pay, and they are paying. They're paying billions of dollars to try to help the situation. And right now, I mean, I talked to folks on the coast, and I think things are pretty much back to normal as far as business and so forth, which is good.
Okay. I've read otherwise. Basil or Jackie?
Yeah, I find that very interesting, Dee Dee, because, you know, I love shows like this because I'm listening about what Blaine is saying, and I love the explanation. You know, you're taking it from one side, he's taking it from another.
Right.
I've been watching the PR campaign. I think that BP has been running a terrific PR campaign.
They have?
Yeah, well, they have been. I mean, you compare this to the Exxon Valdez spill in '89. And one of the things that happened with the Exxon Valdez is that the public perceived that they didn't do reparations quickly enough. So it looked like they didn't care. BP's been running this campaign as though it looks like they do care.
They are spending money, though. I mean, they're paying out like crazy.
However, are they, you know, number one, are they spending the money the right way? Number two, you know, I think we're going to have to wait and see what the court says. Was it gross negligence or not?
Do you think they're going to vote that it was?
I think that they might, yeah.
Well, I mean, Blaine did.
Yeah.
Basil,
And
what do you think?
I'm surprised that they have not come to an agreement already. My
That's what I don't
gut
get.
feeling is that they will before any significant.
It's all
any
about the
trial
money,
goes.
always.
Well, you know what it
Trying
is.
to get more money.
To that point, I think what's also important, to your point as well. I've done some work with large organizations that have to deal with community benefits agreements and things like that. Part of the challenge is finding a group or a few people on the other side of the table that you feel once you give the money to, and once you do these sort of cut this deal with, that you'll actually be sort of done with it. You can move on, and you know that the money is going to go to the right places. If they don't feel, BP that is, that they have a partner to negotiate with across the table, and that they're just going to put money out there, and folks are going to feel that this is it's a bottomless pit, a bottomless pocket, then I think that part of their strategy is, okay, well, we're not going to do that right now because we'll just end up paying until forever.
Right.
But I think until there's this partner that they can negotiate, cut this deal, sign a contract, and just write a check to, they would be happy to do that and move on.
Right. I know we do have another guest at some point I'd love to hear from. His name's Art Rocker. He's the chairman of the Operation People for Peace, and he hopefully he'll bring a whole different perspective. But along the lines of what you were saying, if BP's not found guilty in this civil trial, at least of gross negligence, how do you think the people in the Gulf are going to react? Are they prepared? I mean, what are they going to do if they're not found guilty? Dee Dee, what do you think? Dee Dee. I looked at Jackie and I said Dee Dee. So at least I didn't look at Basil. I meant Jackie. Right. At least I didn't call Basil Dee Dee.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I think that if you put yourself into the skin of the people who are suffering down there, you'll have a whole different perspective. I mean, these are people who are lower to middle class people who are working for a living. Their entire, way of making a living was just snuffed out with this. And that's cumulative.
Yeah, but they're
over time.
giving like $20 billion fund. They're making up for it. They're paying for it. $20 billion is a lot of money. And
Do you think,
from my
you think they've done their best in terms of owning this
Yeah, I
responsibility?
think BP has been over backwards trying to pay the money to make up for the mistake. Gross negligence, no, it doesn't seem like that to me. I'm not an attorney, but it is a high
So
bar.
why are they going to trial then? Why haven't they accepted
Again,
settlement offers?
it's all about the money, and them trying.
They're being greedy.
Perhaps who's being greedy though? I mean, is it the people that still don't? Do they need the money or do they not? And that was to what Basil was saying. I mean, when there's a $20 billion pot, people are going to try to get their hands on it. Whether they need it or not.
Look, you can't say that the motivation is only
You don't know
money.
whether it is or not.
Do you?
We don't know. That's my point. You don't know. But if there's $20 billion sitting there, most people are going to try to get their hands on
When
it.
you see those
and what
images
we-
of those,
No, exactly. Look at
the
those
images of those
Look at those
animals. I
animals.
mean, it's
Yeah.
just
And what we have to
heartbreaking.
remember, this is, 6 years after Katrina also. This region is suffering
Right.
tremendously. So to be honest with you, I don't know if there's any real amount of money that's going to get this region back and get the economy back the way it should.
Which
post
is
the
the
spill,
point. But
post
Part of it is
Katrina,
we still need to pump oil, though.
post-
That's still important. We're not going to stop pumping oil, so we're going to have to deal with the situation and move on. So BP can keep pumping oil because we need it.
How do we? But again, how are we going to make, along the lines of what you said? How are we going to make sure whatever funds that are available are getting to the right places? I mean, are there any checks and balances on this? I mean, I feel like
Important
we're-
that there are, because a lot of these situations, it happens all the time when people don't get the money that they should. It's not spent wisely.
I mean, look at what's happening. There are all these stories about what's happening in Haiti right now, of the millions and millions of dollars in contributions that went. I did a fundraiser for a couple of groups in Haiti, and there are articles about how that money is actually not getting to people. And I think that's the real fear here, that all of this money is out there, but the folks that really need it are not going to get it.
Yeah, we don't want administrators getting paid $300,000
Right.
and the poor people aren't getting the money. That would
Yeah.
be bad, and that does happen.
Right. With that, hang on, you guys. I just want to introduce Art Rocker. He's our other Skype guest. He's the chairman of the Operation People for Peace. Art, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Art, can you hear me? I guess you can't hear me. Hello? All right. Well, wait. We're going to fix his mic in just a moment. But Jackie, I believe you had the floor. Were you about to say something before I smoothly cut you off? Or not so smoothly, apparently.
Yeah,
Oh, you were smooth.
No, I mean, I think we really have to look at the suffering aspect. Who's suffering from this? I really can't agree with you, Dee Dee. I don't think that BP is suffering. I
I
don't
didn't
think
say they were. I'm just saying they're paying $20 billion. It's a big pot, so they're trying to make up for what happened.
All right. Well, let's think about the suffering involved while we go to break. When we come back to Fresh Outlook, we'll continue the discussion on BP, particularly the environmental effects, and hopefully we'll have Art Rocker on the line. Stay with us.